I'm joining you from vacation, so I'm definitely going to keep this short. Minnesota APSI, I've been a member since 1993, which I think is older than some of you on the call today. But I found it to be an inspirational organization to be a part of. I've been on the APSI board, the national board, and the state board, and I've just had the opportunity to meet and learn from so many people around the country. That's kept me in my job for a really long time and kept me motivated to keep moving the mission of our organization and the mission of APSI forward. Our focus is on employment. We're the only organization in the nation that focuses on one thing as it relates to people with disabilities, and that's employment. And how do we increase it? Employment is the path out of poverty for people, and we know that a significant number of people with disabilities live in poverty today, and we want to help them out of that. So I believe I'm just going to jump to the speakers today, this looks like a really fascinating presentation. So I hope you enjoy it. If you're interested in joining Minnesota APSI or being a part of our movement, there'll be plenty of opportunities to do that. We're also having a membership meeting next week. So reach out to Danielle or any other member of the APSI board, and we'd be happy to give you more information. So I'll kick it back to Danielle and or the speakers today. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And I will now turn it over to Ashley Oolman and AJ Woodson for their presentation.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We are so excited to be here. I will get us started. So we are here to talk about unlocking potential, which is all about removing barriers to disability leadership. Our focus for the day is going to be exploring opportunities for us as service providers to challenge ourselves. And in doing so, we'll be challenging the status quo as well. What we plan on accomplishing with you all to get there is first to uncover and investigate barriers that impact opportunities. We will also explore and discover creative solutions to addressing those barriers. And then lastly, participants will have an opportunity to identify and select some actions that you will take at work to start removing those barriers. So we wanted you all to get to know us a little bit. So my name is Ashley Oolman, she, her. I'm a disability inclusion consultant at Lifeworks Services.
I'm Ajani Lewis McGee. I go by AJ. I go by he or him. I work at Allianz Life Insurance, corporate service associate. I'm on the board of Lifeworks.
We also wanted to talk to you all a little bit about how we're personally connected to the subject. So we'll just kick off with a little bit of background of both of our stories. So I identify as a Black neurodivergent woman. I have ADHD and was diagnosed at about age 21. I like to tell, my story for a number of reasons as it relates to environmental barriers and then also professional, like the doubts of professionals being barriers in my life as well. So prior to my diagnosis, I was 17 or 18 years old. I was still in high school. And a little bit later than most of my peers, I had decided that I wanted to go to college. And so I excitedly, set an appointment with my academic counselor, marched into her office and kind of like had this hooray, huzzah moment, declaring that I was ready to start thinking about college and applying to college. And within seconds, she really kind of took the wind out of my sails. She was like, I don't think college is for you. I don't think that you're going to make it. I don't think that your academic performance is good enough. You're not the like most like on point student. And it was just like all these reasons. So I did not take that advice. I ended up getting accepted into a four-year college, though the theme of that meeting was essentially like, if at all, maybe go to a two-year college. Luckily, I was accepted into a four-year and eventually went on to get my MBA. So going back to those kind of two reasons why I like to tell that story. First up is environmental barriers. I started to perform academically significantly better when I was in college. And I know that a big part of that is the control that I had over my schedule. I had control over courses that I was taking, the types of courses I was taking, the professors I was taking them with, where they were, time of day, all those types of things. The learning environment was also significantly different than my public education experience. So, you know, in addition to being able to sleep in the morning or have afternoon classes or whatever it was, there was a lot less authoritarianism built into, you know, the expectations of the classroom. And that was something that was really important to ease me into performing better as a student. And then flipping into the doubts of professionals, you know, this story I think is so relevant to us as service providers, because there are so many opportunities where we too can give advice that can literally change people's lives, whether or not we recognize that or we intend to. And so I just think it's really, really important for us to be mindful of that, you know, and own that, not let, you know, our bias or our perceptions or our doubts get in the way of people and what they're capable of. So my takeaway from my story for all of you is really just don't put yourself between people and their potential, and then give folks control of their own lives, regardless of your beliefs or potential doubts, certainly bias, you know, we all have it, just making sure that we're checking that and not letting that become a barrier.
My story is I was a kid and I was in preschool in Toronto, Canada, and then so my teachers decided to tell me he'll never be able to speak or talk or do anything. So luckily I have the nicest mom and parents that said no, he'll talk when he wants to talk, he'll write when he wants to write, he'll accomplish a lot more than you think he'll be. So since then I moved to Minnesota. I won. Luckily, my mom was at a conference. She saw Lifeworks. Lifeworks was the company that got me the job at Allianz, North America. Ever since then, I've been breaking down barriers at Allianz. And then in 2018, I won 2 awards for 2 different companies, one for Lifeworks and one for Allianz in the same year. And then I joined the board of directors for Lifeworks. And then the takeaway I want from that is give people the chance they deserve, because you can be more successful with different people on your team.
Thanks, AJ. So now that you know a little bit more about, you know, the intention of our session, a little bit more about us and our connection with the topic, we wanted to start with a couple of reflective questions. So I will ask everyone 4 questions, and this is for each of you to kind of maybe even close your eyes and just think about your answer to all of these. So the first question is, have you ever worked with a colleague with a disability? Have you ever had a supervisor with a disability? Do you know about accessibility at your workplace? And lastly, do colleagues talk openly about their disabilities at work? I like to ask these questions of any business or person that I'm working with, but especially service providers, because these 4 questions really start to unravel the ways in which ableism has started to permeate our workplaces. In addition, especially as service providers, we have to take a critical look at ourselves and really kind of determine if we are upholding the ideals that we are trying to promote in the community. So again, you know, when we think about, have you ever worked with a colleague with a disability? Have you ever been supervised, right, by a person who has a disability and openly talks about it at work? Do you know about the ways in which your organization has taken to accessibility and increasing accessibility and things like that? Oftentimes, even when we're talking to service providers, a lot of the time we answer no or not really to these questions, which is really interesting because we've put ourselves in the position of being essentially like the experts in this field, yet might not have very much lived experience or acquired knowledge. So with that foundation setting, AJ is going to talk us through now how to frame and value people with disabilities and disabilities in general differently.
How common are disabilities? Disability is common and normal, part of human experience, and it is natural reflection of human diversity and variation. Globally, approximately 1 in 7 people have a disability. 50% of the global population has some form of disability. There are 61 million people with disability in the US. What's the big deal? People with disability are disproportionately unemployed, which has a tremendous impact on the ability to live, include lives. 50% of people with disabilities have a BA or higher compared to 30% people without disabilities. 37% of people with disabilities are employed versus people without disabilities are employed at a rate of 80%. The average household income is $46,900 per year for people with disabilities versus $74,400 per year for people without. 26% of people with disabilities live below the poverty line versus only 10% people without. The value of we know the underrepresentation is a problem, but did you know how leaders with disabilities show higher amount of drive, which includes the drive to overcome any obstacle of setback or achieve professional goals. Adaptability, which includes the capacity to adapt and flex to different situations for impact. Disability leadership. In the relative recent phenomenon, business leaders from around the world disclose their disability. Executive disclosure could be a critical step to widespread disability discussion at work. As many as 30% of students with learning disability are considered gifted as well. A creative advantage for some is the ability to understand or process information differently. Specifically in leadership, the audacity to take risks for success. Many people with disability face unnecessary barriers daily, including bias and discrimination. Do you know that all of the people pictured are business leaders with disability?
I really love the work that you did in this section, AJ, because essentially what you're talking about, especially in the last 2 slides, is you're like exposing the idea of social conformity and like the expectation that people act a certain way or show up the same way. And so I really appreciate, just you talking about the different ways, right? The diverse ways that people with disabilities show up in the workplace and the value that they can bring. It also doesn't hurt that you're highlighting like multi-million-dollar business owners or folks that run businesses that have made even profits in the billions. So obviously they're proving that people with disabilities are able to not only, work or be in leadership roles, but to like really far exceed folks' expectations. So with that, if folks that are listening today want to start disrupting that social conformity and the idea that like only certain types of people can lead. You know, if folks are here today that want to kind of start to break that apart, what can they do?
First of all, they can start training and mentoring. Training is where should we be open, training employees differently than we are used to. Adjustments are necessary to be accessible. Training employees on disability history, culture, and rights. Second is mentoring. It's crucial component to advance professional skills. People deserve to be challenged, listened to, and believe in. Mentors need to be authentic while they teach and guide, provide crucial feedback to help person reach their goals. What makes a good mentor and what I have learned from mine? My mentor was in executive leadership at Allianz. He told me, if you want to learn, you gotta be uncomfortable to learn. If you're not uncomfortable and you're learning a new skill, you're not learning. Buy-in in committees. Buy-in is in order to get true buy-in. Companies need to address and overcome barriers rooted in bias and stigma. Communicate with everyone often. Transparency is necessary. Make sure commitment is documented and accessible, including original intentions. Have clear expectation on how everyone is supposed to support the initiative. Second is committees. ERG and committees are placed to find support, network, and build collective power. To get started, gain support within the organization, include people from all levels of the organization, have goals that align with the mission and goals of the organization. Events and awards. Events, gatherings that raise awareness, bring people together, and acknowledge contribution to make the workplace more accessible and inclusive. Ensure the events accessible, avoid tokenism and savior complex, and have good food and entertainment. Another way is awards. Recognize workforce excellence, broaden leadership, advance equity. Awards should be available to all employees. Awards should be aligned with company values. So we want to give you a minute to just write in the chat, answer this question that is, what is a workplace culture area you will find? Focus on to begin removing barriers within your workplace.
We'll give folks just a couple minutes to reflect on some of those areas that AJ was talking about. And hopefully you can share the area that maybe makes the most sense where you work. Give about 30 more seconds. All right, so I'm going to keep us moving forward. AJ talked, and thank you, AJ, for that, just talking about the ways that people can start doing things differently within their workplace. Participants got to hear you essentially talking about what they can be doing. The next section, what I'll be talking about is the how. So this is going to be more about the approaches and the intentionality behind the work that we're doing. So I want to talk to everyone just a bit about ableism, how it shows up, how it impacts the work that we do, etc. Something interesting that I started to observe maybe 2 years back is that we, as in we within the disability services industry, as well as, special education, teachers and like professionals in that type of work are oftentimes viewed as experts in the area of disabilities or living with a disability or finding a job with a disability. Though ironically, oftentimes folks either don't have lived experience, meaning they don't have a disability themselves, or they don't have a significant amount of acquired knowledge. What that essentially results in is systems of ableism are built all around us everywhere we go and are constantly being reinforced socially as well. And so what ends up happening is, if we don't challenge those things, if we don't learn about those things, and if we don't, call them out and address them and work on them to begin to dismantle that way of thinking, unfortunately, it absolutely will permeate the work that we do and how we show up at work. So first up, when it comes to individuals, so that's just like each of us on the line today, a person's individual actions can be ableist. For example, holding the belief that disability isn't normal, or that people with disabilities have superior judgment. So I'll give a couple of examples. AJ talked about right at the beginning, having a disability is like a normal part of life. It's a normal part of human variation, though oftentimes that's not what we're taught. That's not how having a disability is talked about. It's definitely not how it's portrayed in the media. And even sometimes like in our own marketing or in the ways that we talk about our own work. So just pausing and thinking about that, do you think that having a disability or being disabled is just a natural part of the human experience? Or do you think, it's like, it's different or it's separate from or other than? And then the next thing is really, really important in the work that we do specifically. So do you believe that non-disabled people have superior judgment? A way that shows up is, let's say we're at an annual meeting and somebody that we're working with, it's their annual meeting and they talk about something that they're upset about or that they're interested in or disappointed by. How we respond in those moments can give signals that we believe that our judgment is superior. Most oftentimes people don't wake up in the morning and say those things out loud, right? Like they don't say like, "Good morning, world. I don't think that having a disability is normal. And I also believe that I, as a non-disabled person, have superior judgment." That's like, we usually aren't that explicit with our bias or ableism or the things that are happening in our minds, which is why it's so important for us to be paying attention to the ways we interact with people, our nonverbal signals that we're sending, the messages that we're sending, our intentions behind the things that we suggest in an annual meeting or for outcomes and things like that. All right, so organizations, as we know, are essentially groups of individual people. And so what happens when we have a group of individuals who have unchecked ableist bias is essentially we've got like now an entire organization where people with disabilities aren't valued equally and are not, and that shows up by not being in positions of power. So again, even as service providers who work alongside people with disabilities, who know lots of people, with disabilities, who care about people with disabilities, that does not necessarily give us a pass and mean that we automatically value people with disabilities equally. A way that shows up chronically in organizations like our own, as well as, just like workplaces anywhere, is what is the type of work that people with disabilities are doing? Is it filling a business need? Is it mission focused? Is it contributing to the overall goals of the organization? Or are they separate jobs or special jobs or different jobs, charity jobs? That is a really huge red flag that our organizations have some work to do to make sure that the way that we demonstrate that we value people equally shows up in the opportunities that we have created, the way that we post them, the way that we talk about them, the people that we interview, right? The way that we're finding people can all be signals of how we value people and how much or how little we're allowing ableism to impact our work. And then that goes directly into the overall theme of our presentation today, which is being in positions of power. So it's one thing to hire a person with a disability, right? It's another thing to make sure that we're hiring people with disabilities into meaningful roles, which oftentimes means that we have to do the work to make our process more accessible. We have to make sure that we don't have unnecessary barriers to where we've posted our jobs, the questions that we're asking, the type of things that we're asking people to demonstrate, et cetera. But then to take all of that a third step further is really thinking about who are the leaders in our organization, whose voices are contributing to the conversations when decisions are made, who is determining the overall direction of the organization, whose opinions matter the most when it comes to changes that are being made and how they're going to be made. When it comes to, being in positions of power, the collective we as a society are starting to more understand why representation is so critical. We obviously are starting to understand essentially the more angles, the more perspectives you have at the table, the more likely you're going to be able to solve a problem, effectively and things like that. And that's a benefit to the organization, right? But what about to all those contributors? Are people getting rewarded for the work that they're doing? Are people getting rewarded for the emotional labor that they are contributing so that the business can become more agile and essentially more competitive? If not, that's a problem. We want to create opportunities for all employees to share, their opinions and their insight, but we also have to make sure that we're not exploiting people's lived experience to the benefit of an organization. All right, and so now we've talked through individuals, we've built up to organizations. Now we're getting even bigger picture, talking about systems. So now we're talking about the rules, the regs, the way that licensing works, the bigger system that we're all a part of. I like to think of it almost like an ecosystem. We're all contributing from different angles, different levels, different experiences. The thing about the disability services system is that historically and even today, people with disabilities are not, and definitely were not consulted in many matters that impact their lives. So we know for a fact that people with disabilities weren't deciding the layout and the design of institutions, right? And though that might seem long ago, that shows up today as well. We're starting to get better at having people at the table and listening sessions and things like that. But again, when we get this one wrong or when we make missteps in this area, it's super obvious, and we have catastrophic situations where, we try to implement something that absolutely fails people, miserably. And so it's just that lesson that comes time and time again, why it is so important that we are listening to what people are saying, what's working, what's not working. And again, why that self-awareness, organizational awareness, and then systems level advocacy is so critical. We have to be willing in the roles that we're in to challenge ourselves on a personal level, to hold, our peers and our colleagues accountable at an organizational level. And then we have to be willing to stand up when we notice that things aren't working. The only way that things can really improve or evolve is with input. And so just again, thinking about the ways that we can elevate the voices of the people that we support, the ways that we can position ourselves within coalitions that stand for what we believe in are all examples of the ways that we can begin to face ableism, but then more importantly, start to dismantle it piece by piece. So now I want to talk to you all about some hot topics that are very, very prevalent in society, but even more problematic when it shows up in the work that we do. So AJ was kind of talking about it in the beginning. People with disabilities live in a society that's filled with assumptions, bias, and stigma, and that's all intertwined with just day-to-day life. So now what we're going to talk about is a couple of things that happen socially and why it matters to the work we do and why we need to address these things. So first up is bias and stigma. These are entrenched ideas and concepts that can negatively impact policies, decisions, and platforms that shape and construct social environments. So again, thinking about ableism on many levels, right? If we have unchecked ableism as individuals, now we're working within an organization who's interpreting licensing standards that were likely made without people with disabilities as like the primary voice or the primary designers. It's like we have all these multiple different layers of entrenched ideas that are totally having an impact on day-to-day life, and that have been truly baked into the social environments or even the work environments that we're a part of. All of those things, that bias and that stigma, impede people's ability to participate in society. So again, an example is, you know, if we think about, there's multiple ways to think about the work we do and the people we support, but pausing for a moment to reflect, you know, do you think that people with disabilities need our help and need our support? Or do you think that people with disabilities are equally valued members of society or should be equally valued members of society? And our work is to help our communities see that and help our communities accomplish that and show up for that. So again, even the ways that we think about the work that we do can be rooted in some bias or some stigma. Next up is privilege. Essentially, it's one of my favorite ways that it's explained is a special right, advantage, or immunity available to only a particular person or group. You know, especially like people who either do not have a disability or have a disability that's not obvious, we have the privilege of disclosing whether or not we have a disability. We have the privilege of sharing whether or not, you know, we want to talk about that part of our life. We also have this kind of parallel experience where we know on a deeper level the ways in which ableism and like disbelief that people with disabilities are capable of competing on an equal level. We've seen it, we've experienced it, right? And so it's really, really important when we show up at work that we're thinking about our privilege. Like, what are some things that society automatically thinks we're going to be able to do because we don't have a disability, right? An example of that is, when we're talking about job postings and like an open position in general, oftentimes when we are a hiring manager and we post a position, we don't know. We don't know. A person will say on their resume what they've done, where they went to school, the types of skills they have, the things that they're interested in, right? But essentially, like, we have to take what they say and at some point decide to take a leap of faith and hire that person. When we have a candidate who has a disability, whether they disclose it or it's obvious or, you know, whatever the situation is, especially you job developers out there, you know that when a hiring manager knows that a person with a disability or a candidate with a disability is coming for an interview, or maybe they're kind of like processing the answers that a person gave, it's like, well, you know, this was good and this was good, but I'm just not sure. Like, I just don't know how this person would handle stress. You know, this person has experience, but I don't know if they'd be able to perform all of the duties that the position needs, those types of things. So it's like, that is privilege, right? Like, us extending our stigma and our bias and then like cloaking opportunities with privilege is a really, really prevalent thing that happens both in our communities, in any typical employer, but even in our organizations. So when we are having, you know, discussions about new positions or filling positions within our organizations, why can't they be filled by people with disabilities? And not just, you know, maybe like the types of jobs that were really prevalent for people with disabilities in the 80s, right? What about the jobs that aren't repetitive? What about the jobs that involve decision making? What about the jobs that are, again, in positions of power? So really challenging ourselves. If we don't think that candidates with disabilities can fill those roles, we have to check why we believe that. That is rooted in privilege. And then more importantly, we need to start to pick apart how we've constructed opportunities within our workplaces to make them so inaccessible to people with disabilities. All right, so moving into tokenism. I'm sure you've heard it before. My favorite definition is making a symbolic effort to do something. Or another way that I explain it is like, oftentimes it's about looking the part, looking the role, but not actually doing anything or changing anything. So again, back to kind of we need more representation. We're going to invite more people to the table to have a conversation about this decision that has to be made. That's an awesome first step. But if you're not taking into account the things that people are contributing, or let's say that folks with disabilities are contributing their perspective, they're at the table and they're sharing what their thoughts are, what their feelings are, their opinions are, and maybe it is contradictory to what you originally thought you were going to decide or thought you were going to plan. If you're not creating space for that disruption, likely you are participating in tokenism by simply having people at a meeting or having people's surveying people for their input, but then not doing anything with it or not valuing it equally. And then the last one, hot topic, is savior complex. We just point blank, we are dripping in savior complex in our industry. Savior complex refers to a state of mind where we believe that our role is to save people or assist people, help people. And a lot of times, especially in, our industry, in other industries where people are working with people, it's human nature, right? Like we connect with people, we care about people. And by nature, it's like, we're helping. If you were to ask every single person who works in employment services in the state of Minnesota, like, what is your job? Like, what is like the core of your job? What is the point of your job? Or why do you do it? Majority of people would continue to say, my job is to help people. I help people with disabilities. I help people with this. I support people with that. And again, wanting to help people or wanting to support people is definitely not a bad thing. That good Samaritan kind of mentality. That said, what if our jobs weren't about helping individual people, but it was more so about challenging, like we talked about at the beginning, challenging the status quo, addressing and acknowledging barriers that are in the community that are creating unnecessary steps for people to have access to opportunities? What if our job is to lean into our privilege to essentially like lift people as we climb, right? So just kind of challenging that mantra of like, I'm a helper, like I'm a community helper, or, it's my job to like be there so that this person can succeed. Anytime we're positioning ourselves between a person and their potential, I can guarantee you that there is a savior complex that's kind of like a part of that equation. And it's so uncomfortable. Like I would imagine that some of you are moving around a bit more in your chairs like, this conversation's getting weird. And that's okay. The point is that we're challenging ourselves and our beliefs internally, and really trying to think critically in those moments. Is this me? Am I making this about me? Is this me making this interview today, or this person getting hired at this place? Am I making this about me and my effort and what I had to do to get this person there? Versus like, I recognize that this person is capable of doing whatever they want to do. I recognize that this person is capable of changing, the workplace that they are a part of. And something that they shouldn't have to deal with is the way that workplace or our society or our communities were set up to make that more difficult for that person. All right, so now let's talk about kind of like the opposite of all that. What does doing the work look like? What should our focus be on? Again, AJ talked about the what we should be doing. He gave us a great punch list of like, if you want to make sure that you are creating opportunities for people and change your culture, here are some things you can do. And again, now this is more about like the focus of how we kind of center. What do we center on when we're doing those things? So first up is accessibility, which is the practice of making technologies, policies, space and culture as optimal for as many people as possible. Oftentimes, even in our own industry, we think about accessibility as like an extra step or another thing we have to do, and we have to just like cancel that and really start to realize and embrace the idea that our communities were built without people with disabilities in mind, oftentimes without people with disabilities input. And so again, if we're going to be in this work and in these roles, we have to challenge ourselves to like model what accessibility looks like, what challenging, things that have been the way that they've been for a really long time. Like when we challenge that, what does that look like? How do we overcome that? All right, next up, we've talked about this a lot today. It's representation. So having people from all different backgrounds, whether it be gender, race, socioeconomic, cultural, disability status, etc. But not just there, having people there and authentically represented. The thing that I think about a lot for myself and how this has changed over time is I would consider myself, especially early in my career, like the queen of assimilation. I mentioned earlier that I identify as a Black neurodivergent woman. I minimized all of that in the first several years of the way that I worked. I acted like everybody else did. I played the role. I, did my best to kind of like tamp down the wild things that I was thinking in the fast-paced way that I wanted to talk about things. And it was exhausting. And like that was something that I had been socialized to do and something that I had bought into as an individual in the workforce. So pausing now to think about as organizations, what we can do about that is like, how can we make sure that we're creating the environment where people don't want to do that, where people don't think they have to do that, or where people are rewarded when they do that, right? So when I think about representation, I don't just think about who do we give an invite. I think about like, what is the vibe in our workplace or in our meeting or whatever it is? And are we creating a space where people want to be authentic and want to, maybe it is disclose, or maybe it is flap out of excitement, or, maybe it is talk ridiculously fast like I do when I'm overstimulated and excited. But like, how do we receive that as an organization? Is our first instinct to be like, oh, don't do that. Like, oh, don't flap. Don't talk slower, or do we create the spaces that are safe enough where people feel like they can be exactly who they are, no matter what? The last couple things I'll say is inclusion is the involvement and empowerment of folks where the inherent worth and dignity of all people are recognized, sustaining a sense of belonging. So again, it's not just about giving out enough invites, it's about making people feel like they want to stay, making people feel like they're a part of the team. And then when it comes to equity, it's just making sure that we're eliminating barriers. Like, you all have heard it, especially being from Minnesota, especially experiencing everything in the civil unrest that we have starting in May. We're hearing diversity and equity and inclusion like anywhere and everywhere all the time. For the people that it matters to the most, equity is not a buzzword. It is very apparent when equity is a focus and equity is invested in. And so just acknowledging how tremendously critical equity is for so many people is like a really important first step. And then just thinking about what that means for your organization, what type of commitment, how long does that, like what length of commitment is that? And what I think about is really that elimination of barriers. So, again, it's not like a statement, we believe in equity. It's like, we're doing this, we realize that, we're going to address this next. We've paused on this project to like blow it up and redesign it with people so that it's, that it works for everyone, like whatever that looks like for you. We are just challenging you to get comfortable, like challenging the way that things have been and really kind of changing the patterns of which things have been done, because we know by data all across the board, whether it's employment or housing or whatever, it's like, we know that things have been built with unnecessary barriers. And until we unravel that and undo that, our societies will continue to be inaccessible and inequitable. So that is a lot of information. We are right on time with 10 minutes to spare for anybody that wants to share or talk. So we've got two things for you all. First, we want to know if you have any questions. So we'll pause and just see if a hand gets raised or anything goes into the chat.
And this is Danielle. I just want to acknowledge that this is a perhaps a more challenging topic to discuss over chat. So please feel free, if you want to talk, ask a question out loud, hit that raise hand button. I'll be monitoring it and I can unmute you so you can talk out loud.
Give another like 30 seconds and we can flip to the next thing. So as you're thinking about potentially questions or maybe you're processing, we also wanted to ask if there are any implementation ideas that you can share. So maybe you don't have a question just yet because you're kind of like just sitting in all of that information and like wading through it all. But are there any areas, like what's an area that you are kind of just like pausing in, kind of sitting in and maybe you don't have ideas of exactly what you'll implement, but it's more so like an area that you need to address. So I'd love to hear from folks if there's an area that you're kind of just ruminating on, thinking about, whether or not you have an idea. I would love to hear from folks on that. Do see someone put into the chat one that wants to hear more about savior complex. Is it incorrect to say we are supporting people in employment? I don't think it's incorrect, to say that you're supporting people in employment. I was just having a conversation about this earlier today. And one thing that I default to is saying things like, I work to remove barriers to employment, or I work with job seekers to make sure that they are able to receive like accessible employment, or removing barriers to employment, or whatever it might be. So, support isn't necessarily a dirty word. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's the savior complex to me is more about the mentality that we bring to the work that we're doing, or the mindset that we bring to the table, if that makes sense. Maybe we're past finding a job, right? Maybe a person is working and your role is supporting that person with a couple of different things. It's kind of like, it kind of depends on each individual person's situation and what exactly it is that you're there to do. But let's be honest, there are a lot of times when we're not in a job situation, or we're not supporting a person for the person's sake or for what they want or need. Maybe they haven't even technically disclosed that they have a disability, but a workplace is so set on, if people with disabilities are going to work here, then they have to have a job coach. So no, I do not think it's like a bad thing or incorrect to say that we're supporting people, but I do think we have to be critical about what we're actually doing to support that person, being really clear about like if we are truly supporting a person based on something that they want or need, and then again, like that mentality that we approach it with. So thank you, great question. Let's see, next question is, if the goal is not to help people in finding employment, but to challenge the status quo so that people can form part of an inclusive society, what language / action do we use or take when we work with this one individual in the moment? Okay, so I think part of that question for me is like, again, what do you believe? Like, do you believe that everybody on your caseload can contribute to the workplace, right? Like, do you believe that workplaces are what's holding people back, or do you feel like people, are just like not able to contribute? So when it comes to, the broader, like challenging the status quo, yet simultaneously we're working with like you can just say like, I work with people. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the individual. Like when we're talking about the work that we do, we don't have to like share people's stories or give their examples or disclose for them, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense, Katya. AJ, do you have anything to add when it comes to like people's mindset when it comes to their work and like what like feels good versus like what doesn't feel good, like when people show up to work and like the way they think about their jobs? Do you have anything to add to it?
Just have a manager that understands people with disabilities and what they need to do, and the manager needs able to support people with disabilities. And that's what I have at Allianz. I have a manager that supports, I have the company that supports people with disabilities, but now I'm changing their mindset. I mean, since I've been there, I haven't seen any little ERGs for people with disabilities. So I decided to just make one. So now that's getting off the ground and running now. I have people all around different companies coming to me and asking me, I heard what you're doing at Allianz. So could you talk to us?
Yeah, I like what you're saying too, because it's like, it's so important, like back to your slides about buy-in. It's like at all levels of an organization, like, so folks that are participating, for example, like those of you, I would imagine there are some folks that supervise that are on this session, in the session with us, but there's also people who do not supervise or like who are not necessarily making like broader decisions. And so, yeah, I really like what you're saying. Like, it's really, really important that especially leadership and management are supporting this way of thinking, or like holding people accountable in a way that's productive. And truly, like, I think what you're getting at is like truly believe that it's possible. And maybe folks are missing opportunities, but then like when someone like you shows up and is like, hey, this is a thing that we should do, this is going to be meaningful to people, like, again, like getting out of the way and like creating that space, I think is huge. And there you go again, like always creating stuff, right? Like I feel like you're always like, I'll just make it myself. Like I feel like that's like your number one thing. Folks, we're getting really close to the end of time, just about 3 minutes. So I'd love to see if there are any other last minute thoughts or comments before we wrap for this session. AJ, I'm going to put you on the spot. What is being a leader? Like, what does being a leader mean to you?
Being a leader, I mean, I think my mentor at Allianz thinks I'm a leader in this subject, and he's say, hey, go write a paper. And I did. And then he said, go. Then he said, I'll introduce you to the diversity inclusion person for Allianz. Go talk to her. And then she told me to go get support from my new ERG group at Allianz called All Able. And I got support from different managers, and I was talking to employees, and they all said, no, that's a no-brainer. We should be doing that a long time ago.
I love it. You always, I feel like you're the type of person that like, no matter what you do or who you come in contact with, you make things better, like no matter where you go. That's like my favorite quality about you that I've really appreciated as we work together. So thank you for sharing your personal experience as a leader. I'm going to just close us with the notion that breaking down barriers starts with building a culture of openness, accountability, and innovation. And so though all of those words seem like happy and fluffy and easy, there's a call to action there. There's tough stuff in that. There's moments that are really difficult. And so I would just challenge everyone who joined us today to really think about what that means to you as an individual, and more importantly, to the work that we do in the communities that we want to create. So with that, I appreciate your time so much. And if you have any other like personal questions, I do have AJ and my contact info on the bottom right of the screen.
Thank you so much, Ashley and AJ. That was a great ending to the 2020 Minnesota APSI conference. Not necessarily because it like wrapped everything up neatly in a bow. I think that your presentation has been a great reminder of the work that all of us continue to have to do, both in our organizations and within ourselves, to really make the work we do and the places we work and the world around us more equitable and truly inclusive for everyone. So thank you so much. There was a lot to think about there. That was really awesome. And thank you to everyone who joined us today and over the past 3 weeks. Just a little note that we will be sending out a very short evaluation for the conference sometime in the next week or so. And it'd be great if you could fill that out just to give us some more ideas about moving forward, what might be helpful trainings that we could help plan for Minnesota APSI members. So look for that in your email, and thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day.